piece story. Other news publications can pick that up and they kind of have the story written for them. So that was in some ways helpful to us on our end. Gene always does a good job on that stuff. I know he got pulled off there at the end on another breaking story on Friday afternoon, but there has been a few news publications around that have picked up that I've talked to since, mostly trade publications, but the reach of that hasn't gone any farther than Oregon that I've seen. I heard a gentleman today say the New York Times had called him, but we have not heard from the New York Times or any publication beyond the Northwest or anywhere along those lines. On the DDE issue, to sort of speak to how the communications rolled on that, after we met collectively as a group, I was in communication with the other state agencies that would need to be involved or at least be aware of what was going on with that. Ran communications that I had drafted and ran by our staff here with those agencies as well. So everyone was aware as to what we were going to be saying. The message was specifically our own, and we did not mention anyone else, but I want everyone to be aware of what was happening so that they would be ready in case there was any sort of response that came down. The agencies acted accordingly. So since then, that's been the only outside real communication that we have put out on this issue other than today's agenda for the board meeting, et cetera. Moving on to social equity. You've heard me say kind of each month that I've had a little bit of pride in that the social equity website is getting views by people that are coming to our site starting way back in December. It was at 31st, it went from 31 to 11th. Well, anyway, it's continued to move up the ladder. And so as of through the March Google Analytics, it was occupied the 3rd and the 4th spot of the most viewed places on our website. So you're right there with the homepage. The number 3 was the social equity checklist. Number 4 was the social equity homepage of our site. Heard me? Yeah, I'm proud of that. It's something that I'm measured on as far as communications is in our strategic plan. Yeah. And it's a niche market that's coming to that site. I keep saying that, but it's competing with banquet permits and people that just come to our website in general. So we know we're reaching people through our website, which was our target, and we're getting there. Cool. Onwards, I'm always involved during the legislative session and working with any communication needs. I was going to tease Ollie on that because I think she did more work with her on her testimony for her stuff that I think she set a record for the most times spoken on testimony. Going back to the fiscal committees, to each of the houses, I think she probably did 6 times on social equity. But anyway, working with her and the others as to whatever we might need during the legislative stuff. Working on a briefing packet in coordination with the other divisions for the new director when that person comes on board. We issued our newsletters for the cannabis industry and the alcohol industry in late March. I do that each time in conjunction with the divisions. We coordinate and produce our own original materials and stuff like that, how it looks on Medium. So we've been hitting a lot of communications going out recently. And then coming up in May is the Public Service Recognition Week, and we'll be joining other state agencies up on the Capitol campus with a booth about the LCB. I'm co-leading this with Anita Bingham and HR, and it's a cross interdivisional team. I guess all the divisions are participating and putting up stuff about our agency culture, about public health messages, and something that we know that we're always asked about is cannabis revenue and where that money goes. And we're going to have visuals and graphics and be present at the site. We hope you guys can come by that day. I think Dustin was suggesting EMT that day, but we will see. And then lastly, I missed the board meeting, most of it this morning, because I was participating in the CANRA Public Education and Communication Stakeholder Meeting. And was quite involved today unexpectedly, but I was glad to do that. They're forming a small kind of a subgroup of people that can help with communications for the organization, and they kind of lean on me sometimes anyway, and I'm going to volunteer to be part of that and help Jillian out, I think, a little bit. This DDE was a great example, is that they reached out to her, she kind of reached out to us, and it was like, she had a good idea as to what Kenra should say and what conduct with how she wouldn't say. So anyway, I will be involved with that, kind of going forward with, I think, a small group of folks on the national perspective, I guess, at least through Canada. So whipping through that, is there any questions?
No, thanks for doing that, because You know, Canada's brand new, as you know. They don't have a person that has a lot of experience in communications. You do, so
Yeah.
it's really great for you to help.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah. Don't see any questions. Thanks, Brian. Sounds good. Mark Webster has joined us, and we will turn to him for a legislative update. Rick, if you can, there you go. Thank you. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Chairperson. So I guess we can start with the good news. As we talked about on Tuesday, the social equity bill did pass by a 60 to 38 vote. So very good margin there. Also on that date, Jim was confirmed.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
3 for 3.
Yeah. Got them all.
We got them all. I think it's been a long time.
No one
I'm gonna
knows
go
how
look.
long it's.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go
Rick
look.
was gonna, yeah.
Gonna find out.
Yeah.
So because both of the THC bill, of course, passed the previous week, both of those bills were amended in the House. So both will go back to the Senate for concurrence. I don't think we anticipate any sort of issues with that. The amendments were very minor. Let's see, I think. Oh, one other thing is the budget. I think we're going to be focusing on the budget now that the bills are through. We noticed that funding for the lab at the Department of Ag was not included in the House budget. So I think we're going to be needing to do what we can to advocate for that. We're watching why it's so necessary. And because of that DDE issue, we're getting a lot of questions from members. So thank you to Brian, thank you to Sean for helping with that, but that will continue, I think, for the next 2 weeks.
That should convince them to fully fund the lab.
I would hope.
Their
And of course,
constituents will want that, yeah.
yeah, and all these licensees were,
From Eastern Washington.
from Eastern Washington who are calling in to us, are calling their representatives. So I think it should be an easy fix, but with just one that we need to make sure that they make. Again, that was fixed on the Senate floor, but we just need to make sure that that happens on the House side too, or that in the conference budget that it is included. I'm glad that it's in one of the two proposals, but just really need to have that.
And it was in the governor's budget.
Of course, yes.
So you've got 2 of 3.
2 of 3. And there's a couple different ways they can do that. Going back a few years, of course, that funding was at the LCB, and then we would just send it to them through an interagency agreement. They wanted it to budget it directly at Ag. So for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, maybe they budgeted it directly at the Department of Agriculture using the dedicated cannabis account. They could continue to do it that way. They could revert to the old way and put the money back here for us to send over. We're neutral on that, but they just have to do something.
You had talked about, Mark, maybe talking to OFM so that
Yes.
they're aware that when they negotiate the budget,
Right.
maybe even a letter.
That's, we talked about that briefly yesterday. Maybe a letter from
Derek, Department of Ag and
yeah.
ourselves.
And so I'll reach out to Kelly McLean at Ag to see how they're doing it. And just to make sure that it is included in the big OFM list of concerns.
Right. That's what I was gonna say, get in that concerns letter.
Yeah.
I know Kelly was on that, but I'll just double check to see what the status is.
We heard board testimony of your great work.
No.
Yeah, I don't know if I
By
got
the
a
way,
chance
Mark,
to hear
I don't know
that,
if you
yeah,
heard it.
yeah.
Thank you. I was going to say thank you to each of the board members, especially on that social equity bill. Every time it looked like it might get stuck or could get stuck, you know, each of the board members were able to kind of get it moving again. Makes my job really easy.
Yep. Excellent.
That's all I've got for now.
Okay. All right, let's move on then. Enforcement and education. Chandra Wax. Hello again.
Dang, that mute button gets me every time. Good morning, good afternoon, thank you. Dustin, I believe, is going to drive my slides today. One thing we'll be doing together is seeing them all for the first time, so that'll be fun. We'll run through these today and that's not true. I saw them earlier this week and took some notes. But obviously haven't had as much time to prep as I normally do. So let's get started. I always start with a number, just so I have a little perspective of what we're talking about. When we start talking about percentages of licensees that our officers has visited, I need a reminder to remember that there's a substantial difference in the number of licenses we have, for instance, in liquor and cannabis. One thing of note, cannabis licenses, at least by these numbers or the numbers that I'm using, are down about 9% since pre-COVID, which is interesting. So moving on to the next slide. When we look at the number of complaints by unit, liquor, cannabis, tobacco, these are broken out by the last 3 months, January, February, and March. I know one of the things that the board has been interested previously in is how many of those were generated internally and how many were generated externally. If we look at the 48 complaints in March from cannabis, 40% of those were generated internally, and most of those were pesticide quality control samples. And then in tobacco and vapor, 28% of those are generated internally. And what that means essentially is typically those are things either like a pesticide test that comes to us or that our officers see when they're out doing a visit or a premise check. When we look at the complaints overall, the number of complaints were 617 from January to March of 2023, and 57% of those are public safety. But if we look at the liquor industry, that stands out specifically, and that is almost 80% of those complaints that we processed in that industry thus far this year have been directly related to public safety issues, and that's a good number. And when we look at education and violations, one of the things that stands out to me, specifically on the right side, and when we look at that middle column for the notice to corrects, I've talked to you a couple of times about how our officers are increasingly using that tool. It allows them to document, it allows them to provide documented education, and it's kind of the last step before we start looking at enforcement action. And so you can see how much that tool has increased in that we're 3 months into this year, and we've used that as many times as we did almost in 2021. So that's a tool we use pretty heavily. When we look at licensee education, you can see that it just continues to increase. I think it enhances the way we do our work. Our education is higher in the first quarter of 2023, even than it was in the fourth quarter of 2022. Knowing where we're at with staffing, that's incredibly impressive to me. We're on track to be at 31,000 educational contacts for the year of 2023, which is super exciting, especially when we talk about how we engage our licensees. When we break down those educational contacts, you can see that all 3 of those areas are going to likely work out to be higher this year than in the previous years. And even with the difficulties we're having with staffing in these units, they're getting out there and making this a priority. I asked that on this slide, and we'll just see how we like it. I asked that we break out the consultants here since we've built our education team. So we know that right now that team is specifically focused in cannabis as it was intended. And I just wanted to break out and see the additional work that those employees are doing. Whether we decide to leave it like this or look at it a different way, this is a good way for us to look at the data in March, that when we talk about our education unit, those. So I have 2 dogs, and somebody just came in the front door. Surprise. Anyway,
Can I ask you a question about that? So
please.
you're saying, so the one labeled cannabis, that would be officer licensee education. The one said consultants is obviously consultants. So we add them together, that'd be total cannabis contacts.
Yes, and that's one of the things that I thought about doing is stacking those numbers on top of each other, but that gets really messy number wise. So I just left it separate so we could specifically see it, but you're absolutely correct. That's exactly what that means. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
And And when we look at the topics for education, you can see exactly what we're out there talking to our licensees about, and this stays pretty consistent, driven by regulatory questions, youth access, public safety, licensing and permits. We always work together with our partners in other divisions, and then lots of tobacco and education, tobacco education as well. When we break down our warnings, AVNs, and NTCs, you can see exactly how many of those have been used in each of the industries or types for 2023. And then we can look at notices to correct. One of the things that I find interesting when I look at the notice to correct data is that our use of them is up, but we're not using it specifically for any one thing. And I always want to make sure that we're, like we've talked about, committed to using education first to help folks get in compliance until they've made it clear that compliance is not the goal, and then we move to enforcement. What I like about the NTC is that I don't see people using it where we shouldn't be, which in my opinion would be in a public safety issue. We need to be really strong and immediate in correcting those public safety issues. But the topics vary, and it's kind of spread out. It's not just in one particular area. So I think this has worked out to be a good tool for the enforcement and education team. And then when we look at the administrative violation notices or AVNs, you can see that again, these continue to stay focused in areas of public safety and that in the service to persons under 21. And then there were a couple of sailor service to an apparently intoxicated person. And those usually come in as complaints to us where licensees are over serving. When we look at those warning topics, you can see that our tobacco team is out there in the area doing their work. A lot of these warnings come out of our tobacco and vapor team. You can see the numbers there, 25 for MSA.
What's MSA mean?
The Master Services Agreement.
Yeah, thanks.
Mm-hmm. And then this is another example of our commitment to resolving things at the lowest level possible. I just want to say that again, on that right side, my staff highlights this every time I meet with them. We have not had a cannabis case go forward to formal hearing since last May. So if the stats are the same for next month, we'll have been a year resolving these with the licensees at the lowest level possible. Great work happening in this unit. Now we're going to talk about youth access compliance checks. You can see that 248 of these were done by the liquor team this month, and that we had an 88% compliance rate. So we always look at data, we look at situations, and we try to see if there's a reason that we see that little jump there. And it's a pretty fair distribution of license types, and we didn't find really a reason for that. But we are still using the random assignment and instead of people selecting where they're going for compliance checks. So you can see that that's working out with a fair distribution of license types. And for this month, we had an 88% compliance rate. We're going to talk about delivery and curbside. I am going to say 100% yay, bravo. However, I am also going to say that we only had the opportunity to do 5 checks this month. We committed to and performed wonderfully getting some of those checks done in session. So we had some data and information to make decisions with, and staff did a great job doing that. 2 of those were delivery checks. They were both third-party delivery and no sale was made. And then we're having a really hard time finding places that will deliver. And so there's always possibilities that there's reasons for that. But the fact of the matter is we switched resources to doing curbside checks and did 3 of those and made no sales. We do last time we talked about wondering if having them all in a hotel had an impact. So we've been able to use some partnerships throughout the state and possibly explore using houses or apartments that aren't currently in use to do some of those. So that'll be exciting to see if the data is any different when that happens. We look at cannabis compliance for youth access. We did 123 checks last month and had a 93% compliance rate. Tobacco and vapor compliance, 148 checks at 84%. And just so you know, the sign-our checks that we do on contract, we're 76% done with those for the year, but a lot of these are those checks that we're performing. Premise checks, you can see the number of times that our officers are getting out there and visiting with our licensees. On the top right corner, you'll see the percentage of locations visited thus far, and cannabis is yet again doing a great job getting those numbers. And everybody is has high numbers for the month of March. It's impressive work. ID checks. This is the number of locations where we checked IDs. We believe that this is another opportunity for us to do some prevention work and impact youth access by IDing folks that look youthful when we're out there doing our premise checks or investigations in licensee locations. This is sorry, go ahead.
No, that's right. Go ahead.
This is the data for our CRY unit. I would just point out on the bottom right hand of this slide, we talked last quarter about the impact of all the cannabis renewals has on staff. And I just wanted to show you that now that we're back to a normal workload for the first quarter of this year, we had 277 cannabis renewals that we processed. In the fourth quarter, we had 722. So that means that doesn't just obviously just doesn't impact our enforcement staff, but that also impacts many other teams throughout the agency. So recognition of the great work this unit does and how it supports HR and licensing and all of the other divisions that do any hiring at all as well. Examiners, we're going to start breaking this out so we can see it change month to month. I've been watching these numbers really closely and I want to see them change. I want to see the CCRS numbers go down a little bit and I want to see the field assistance numbers go up a little bit. We're starting to use this team in more of a supportive way. You can see their report and analysis numbers rising and I'd like to see those change over the month instead of being a cumulative number. So that'll be a change you'll be seeing. But again, a great team and great partners in the enforcement division. FDA, another resource we have out there in our community, talking to our licensees, but on behalf of the FDA, that's 966 more inspections that happened in our state and contact with our licensees. And then they have a separate compliance rate that they keep. Similar, our tobacco and vapor, theirs is 80%. And then we had one officer conduct complaint added that we are currently looking into. It's pending, but again, we believe in being transparent and we share when we have licensee complaints. So we share when we have officer complaints. Hiring and recruiting. This continues to be a battle, not just for our division, certainly, but for other places in the agency and also across the state. I think it's impacting everyone. We have 35 vacancies, 8 in background. We've hired 2. This is a number that stays pretty constant, and we're working really hard to keep it constant. Our training team continues to provide high quality training. We had a great leadership opportunity to get away with my managers and supervisors and really do some mentoring and training of our newly promoted folks and just reconnect with the team, focus on our strategic plan and goals and the objectives within that plan and how it connects to the work the agency is doing, and partner with our change management personnel from SMP and with our AAG, and just really provide some great training and education to our leaders. So that's exciting for us to get to do this last month. And then I have a great list somewhere in my email of all the wonderful partnerships that my staff made this month, and I'll
just
send it to you in
imagine
email.
Okay.
What did you say?
We'll imagine them up there.
Yeah, I should be reading them to you right now. I'll email them to you. How's that?
It's okay, good.
Any questions?
For me, I don't see any for you. Thanks. Oh, yeah, Brian's got something. Hold on.
I just wanted to comment on something from an independent source that backs up what Chandra's talking there, is that last week the Seattle Times ran a story that was originally ran in the Skagit Valley Herald, and it was kind of a Q&A with various cannabis licensees. And they spoke to a retailer there, and the question was, what is the biggest change that you've seen in your time as a retailer? And she goes, because it was the LCB's change in how they approach us when they come in here, and they're very educational focused. Said they care the most about underage sales, and she goes, which is where it should be. But I thought of all the things this retailer has seen within the industry, that the approach that we have with them was stood up to them the most.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's right. That is our priority.
You know, just one thing I would add is I saw that we did 123 compliance checks for cannabis in that month. I think it was March. That's like 30% of our retail licensees for cannabis in 1 month, which just gets back to the more compliance checks you can do, the more compliant licensees will be.
And they're over 90%.
You know what I mean?
Right.
It's huge. So we're getting to them 2 or 3 times a year, Chandra, it sounds like, and we do not have the capacity to do that for alcohol, which is probably why the compliance rate is
Yeah,
low.
I just don't want that to be the expectation in liquor, right? We're not gonna get to 30% of 18,000 licensees.
No, but that's why, we were talking about the delivery bill a lot, and, this idea that we could come up with an enforcement plan to get to 95%. It would take, I can't do the math, but a whole bunch of officers out there doing compliance checks to get anywhere near what we do for cannabis. Yeah, okay.
It also highlights the challenges of having so many vacancies, and if we had those vacancies filled, we could see even more compliance checks.
That's right. Yep. Yeah, it's been steady at about 30 for what, a year, 2 years now?
Go back to. when you-
Has that always been the case? Even, yeah.
It's been a while now.
Yeah, I mean, in the highest compliance.
No, I meant the vacancies in.
No, we had a dip. We were actually doing pretty reasonable, but we had a budget issue in 2018 into 19 where we had to freeze hiring for a while. And that's where the buildup kind of occurred. And then when we went through some of the transitional period and we were changing, job descriptions and modifying the approach, that created also a delay. And so that kind of stacked up, and we had been in a reasonable position, but Chandra took on a pretty big deficit when she took over.
It seems like since you and I got here about Chandra, it's been somewhere in that 30 range.
Yeah, well, if Justin wouldn't have said it, I was gonna say that it was like that when Justin gave it to me, so.
We're not here to assess blame.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, my bad.
I mean, I also know that it's true in other law enforcement agencies too. It is hard. And I know that
Absolutely.
our friends at the patrol have struggled with this for years. It's tough, but okay. We'll move to a licensing update with Becky Smith, our licensing and regulation director. Hello again.
Hello again, everyone. Good afternoon. So I believe now that Chandra has set the bar, I believe you pull up there we go.
Whoa.
So I wanted to start with our cannabis and liquor license units are engaging in improvement project to reduce the timeframes to issue licenses and change applications. And I start with that because the numbers that you're going to see aren't great, and that we recognize that for both liquor and cannabis. That this slide shows the amount of applications received in calendar year 2022. The blue line represents liquor applications, the green represents cannabis applications, the purple represents the special occasion applications that we've received. We're just about back to pre-pandemic number for liquor applications that we received. And for cannabis, the incoming applications have gradually declined over the years. And that, of course, is because most of the application window has been closed for several years for retail producers and processors. And then with the exception of cannabis, of course, the applications, we still are not quite where we were receiving the amount of applications we did prior to the pandemic. Special occasions being the most impacted with about a 50% decline. So less applications than we received in 2019. And then here, the slide shows the amount of applications issued in calendar year 2022, the percent of applications that were processed with our target timelines. For liquor applications issued are shown on the left in blue, and in orange, I guess, in orange, you'll see that that's what was the processing time. So where we want to get was 60 days, and you can see there that we were well below issuing liquor licenses in 60 days. And then for cannabis applications issued, those are shown on the right in green. And the orange line represents the amount of those applications that were processed in 90 days. Again, significantly lower than what we want to see.
What do you think happened from Q3 to Q4 on the cannabis side there? That's like the biggest drop of the two.
Yeah, I think that we were just waiting for some of these licensees to turn in their information. They were just sitting on build out.
Right.
And so when they sit on build out, they sat on build out for years. And so we weren't just talking, that when we were in the pandemic, some of those build outs were 3 years, and they hadn't done anything in that time frame.
Yeah.
But I will share with you what our plan is going forward. So the next slide is this slide shows the amount of special occasions issued in calendar year 2022, with the orange line showing how many of those applications were issued in 45 days. Again, not a problem for us to issue special occasion licenses in 45 days. Most of the time, the majority of those come in, they're required we ask that they submit their applications prior to 45 days. And a lot of times it's a week and we get a phone call to help issue a special occasion license. The summer months are our most busiest time and for special occasions. So we're hoping to see that increase. That already in 2023, from January to March, we've received 750 applications have been issued. So again, we're starting to see that climb happen, and we're hoping to see a significant amount of applications come in the next few months. And then, of course, with those that come in, it's important to show what's happening on those applications. And this chart on the left shows the amount of liquor applications withdrawn in 2022. And the pie chart on the right shows the reason for the applications being withdrawn. As you can see there, the most significant amount is because the documents weren't received. And so we, of course, the investigators send out reminders. They send out reminders before they'll even withdraw the application. So usually by the time it's withdrawn, it's because it's been at least months before they haven't received any documents at all. And then the same goes for the applications and withdrawal for cannabis. Again, the pie chart shows to the right here the reason for the applications being withdrawn. And 50% are because the applicant requests those to withdraw their application. So they decide not to make the changes, decide not to make the move, decide not to do the addition. And then the next highest amount, of course, is failure to submit documents. And then I do want to share, we rarely hear about the customer satisfaction survey, but this shows a result from our customer satisfaction survey that gets out to each licensee when the application is issued. That although it doesn't show it here in any of these percentages, I do want to mention that we've gone back to our cannabis supervisors, have gone back to reaching out to those folks who have received a final approval. So they call them after that's happened just to interview them to find out if they have been satisfied with the process, with the information that they received. And so far, we have a 96% satisfaction rate.
That's great.
And then here's the training and education. So we have a training education unit, and they do most of, not all of our onboarding. And so we've done quite a few hiring, as you can see here, just since January of 2023. We've done 33 onboarding trainings for new staff. So onboarding is anything from showing somebody how to use a computer, showing folks how to use our systems, as well as the process. So how do you process an application through either customer service, liquor, or liquor? And then here, I have to mention, because we do a lot of training with S&P, or this was a partnership. I will say that with our training team, with our S&P SMEs, with our organizational change management team, they supported the licensing in doing some Laserfish and iSeries workflow and rollout. And the licensing team provided like triage, so they would have hours in which they provided training. We hope to see the same happen here in June. And then the training team reached out to every single employee. So it's not the ones that we hear from, it's the ones that we don't hear from that tend to struggle. So that I asked our training team to make sure that they reach out to every employee, not just once, but twice, and then again, just to make sure for those quiet folks that we don't hear from, that just aren't getting the system, that they're learning tricks of the trade, they're learning how to just do the workflow. And so that's been great for our licensing staff. And then staff changes. So again, new hires, 7. We've done a lot of internal transfers, which, you know, that we rob Peter to pay Paul, certainly. And then here we still have some vacancies for our customer service, and we have 3 for our liquor staff. It usually takes about 3 months for somebody to learn the system. And that's not all of especially in liquor, I would say that it's usually a year, if not more, for those folks just to learn all the different license types that somebody has to or is going to apply for. What doesn't show as vacancies is that soon I will be having a vacancy for my assistant. Tina's last day is Friday. She is moved to Colorado and moving on to a new life there. And so I definitely wish her well. And then we're also hiring. We're still in the process of hiring for a social equity manager. I will tell you that I was so impressed by the applicants that we received. And so I'm in the final stages of hiring for that position. So I just want to also mention, before I move on to just sharing what we are doing with all of this, is I do want to share that enforcement and licensing. So Chandra and I will be taking our leaders, so our captains and our managers, off-site for 3 days to do some training together. So, you know, that our hope is to really improve how we communicate with one another. We're going to be looking at how we prioritize, what policies and rules we want to prioritize. And again, together, we're going to talk about discontinued businesses and how that process works. And so we're really excited. That's happening at the beginning of May, but it'll be a few days offsite with just our leadership in both enforcement and licensing. So I do want to mention about what we're changing. So we've added staff to the liquor unit and reduced staff in the cannabis unit to reflect the work that's coming in. That we plan to share this information on our website and in the agency liquor and cannabis newsletters, and directly with those folks, especially with our authorized reps on the liquor side. We want to make sure that they understand any changes that we're making in our process, especially when it comes to timeframes. Our supervisors also, if you don't know, they send out an email to let folks know now once who their investigator is, and also the timeframes. So there's no question on who they need to contact once that application is received, and that's new. And that with legislation that happened this year, one of the things that one of the senators was looking at requiring was for LCB to issue liquor licenses and within 45 days after receiving all of the documents. So although that bill didn't pass, we recognize this as an opportunity to look at our licensing process. And not just in liquor, but in cannabis as well. We want to be able to reduce those time frames and for our licensees. And so during the pandemic, that the applicants were experiencing work and supply chain. And so that really just slowed down the process, that a lot of things came to a halt, as you know, but things have returned to normal. And so with that, it's this opportunity for us to take another look at our timeframes to go from 70 days to issue a liquor license to 45 days. That we want to begin to start with beer and wine restaurants and taverns. So we want to just concentrate on a certain type of a license. We have 4 of our licensing investigators that work specifically on those licenses. And again, on the process to see where we can make changes, where we can make improvement. And then there'll be some efficiencies that we'll make for the licensees as well, or those applicants that instead of requiring the applicants return their documents in 14 days, it'll be 7 days. That instead of us calling them back in 5 to 6 days, they'll be receiving a phone call in 2 days. That once we receive their packet back, that will be reviewed within 7 days. Again, it's important that our applicants know the timeframes that it takes to issue a license and what the requirements are as well. For cannabis, we're going to be doing the same thing. Right now, it's from 90 days to 120 days, and for applications to be processed, and that's just too long. We're not receiving enough applications to be taking that long to issue licenses or issue those change requests. So we're going to change that, and now we expect those to be completed within 60 days. And then for build out, because we know that build out usually takes longer for an applicant, that those can go up to 90 days. And we'll, instead of a month request for those applications for information on why the build out's taking so long, we used to say every month we check in. Now it's every 2 weeks that we're going to be checking in with those licensees to make sure that they're making progress. Again, same timelines that we want to shorten the process for documents to 7 days, that we're shortening the time frame for somebody to make contact and do those interviews within 2 days. And then again, hoping that this process will really bring change and some efficiencies to the licensing process. So I'm going to stop and see if you have questions.
Just one, I'm really glad to hear that focus on those process. That's great. And I'm glad you mentioned the bill that we had before us that didn't pass. But we should remember, maybe just wait till after session to follow up with that bill sponsor and let him know what you're doing to keep going on this and keep him up to date would be great.
Absolutely.
Cool.
And that's it for licensing.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions here? Okay, we will move to policy with Justin Nordhorn.
Good afternoon, Chair Postman, members Garrett and Mollendroff. There we go. So we've got a number of things obviously going on within the policy unit. You've heard most of them in caucus and even today in the presentation, so I won't rehash a lot of what you've already heard. On some other fronts, first off, I'd like to thank Brian's team for their assistance around the website update. So that's going, moving forward on the public health website updates that we have. Unfortunately, we're losing Liz to Department of Health. So she got a permanent job over there, but they're towards completion. And so Brian's team has been helping out with layout and those types of things. And so that program or that project is moving forward. We also have a number of bills, obviously, moving through the session that we've been engaged with, but we're also anticipating the amount of rulemaking this is going to take. And I think that the rule projects that are on the forefront are higher than average as far as the quantity and then the complexity, I would say as well. So that may mean we have to table some of the other ones or slow some other projects down depending on what those timeframes of the final bills look like on if we have to have implementation. And for example, 5448 doesn't necessarily have the fast timeline. However, we will have a report that we need to provide to the legislature on a comprehensive approach to compliance around those things. So that's going to require, looking out for, I think, our partners throughout the National Liquor Law Enforcement Association, NABCA, National Alcohol Beverage Control Association, NCSLA, those folks that we can gather information on what are they seeing with those home deliveries. Is something working particularly well? Obviously wanting to have some conversations internally and on can we identify those folks that really do a good job and then maybe learn from those licensees in that particular area. So there'll be a number of issues that we'll have to look at, but it's not going to be a full-blown study. And that's not what the bill called for. And with that tight timeline, we're going to have to obviously have something done, quite frankly, by the end of September in order for us to vet it internally to be able to get it to the legislature in a timely manner. So those types of things that are not necessarily legislative implementation are certainly on the forefront as well. But we've been looking at a number of different areas along with CANRA. So participated in the medical programs across the U.S. A lot of states have dedicated medical programs. Not very many have the integrated programs. And so we're really in a learning mode from what's working well in other areas to try to leverage some ideas on what can we do as a state to improve that particular area. And this past week, we were speaking and we actually had kind of a robust side conversation around Washington because they were asking about some of our responsible vendor programs like we have in alcohol, but we don't necessarily have it across the board. And so I was able to speak to that a little bit because other states are looking at what does that look like. And so people reference mass programs, they reference the responsible vendor programs. So we were able to at least provide that level of experience that we've seen in other areas on what's worked well when folks are considering that level of education and training. So I'm sure that there's going to be more conversations around that for folks, but they're all dealing with a number of the same issues that we saw in the study that the master's program person presented. So I think that there will be a lot of commonality as we continue to look at that issue. So speaking, well, I'll come back to that. So the other thing that we've been talking with CANRA on, I've been sitting on committees for interstate commerce roadmap discussions. We've had a number of different areas to discuss. This last week, we were talking about taxation across state lines. There's definitely a number of interest points, and for example, tax stamps came up, and folks often think tax stamps are an easy way to do that. And for cigarettes, certainly because you have a 20-pack and a 25-pack. We haven't found that to be as easy with OTP, for example, in the past. And so when you're talking about the number of types of products, when you got your usable cannabis, you've got solids, liquids, dabs, all of these different types, if folks are utilizing the same framework where they would be buying stamps from the state to be able to apply on these, what does that look like? And we, in tobacco, we have stamping wholesalers. And so it was a good conversation to be able to try to put out the ideas on the table and say, what does this look like in other states? Is anybody having success with that? I have some slight reservations around going to the stamping system with so many different products. I think that might be a larger challenge that is not necessarily a good return on investment, but trying to keep an open mind. We'll see, what other folks are talking about in lines with that.
Have you discussed at all common testing standards?
Yeah, some of the standardization has come up. That's definitely a point of interest for all the states. How is this going to look? And of course, we'd love to provide some feedback to the federal government that's an area that would be very beneficial to have federal oversight on, to set those standards so we don't have those differing types of things. Because I think what the default is going to be is whoever's shipping into a state are going to have to meet that state standard. So if they're planning on shipping into 30 states, then they may have different things, and that could really bog down some of the commerce issues. And depending on the level of standards folks have, there certainly could be an imbalance, I think, on some of those commerce issues. So definitely something that is being discussed. We also had interactions and compacts discussed around tribal nations. What does that look like for different states? And then also they're looking at the systems and those types of things on what that would look like going across state lines. So general brainstorming is predominantly what's happening right now. They're just working through a number of different talking points. And that committee's meeting monthly, so we'll be keeping folks up to date on what we're finding in that particular area. On another front, we had kind of a new stakeholder engagement approach we tried out, similar to the World Cafe, but we just did more of an informal discussion. So it wasn't like breakout rooms and those types of things. So we had that last month. I felt it went really well. We had not as many people came that signed up to come in person, but we still had around 15 people, I think. And that was a really nice number to be able to have open conversation. It went the full 2 hours. Full engagement throughout the entire time. We did do a survey, an after action survey, to find out how people liked it. And not surprising, the folks who came in person had very high remarks. We had the lower remarks on the online observation only model. And so to do the interactive online model, I think is going to require good coordination and additional resources. And so if we want to be able to have some of these more often, then the resource implications kind of drive some of that. So we're still looking at that feedback, trying to figure out, okay, where do we want to take this? Folks, we're open to having those conversations. Again, in the future, one of the things that we really tried to do is make a safe environment. So said anything that's said in here should be able to be shared freely. So we understand what's actually happening in the industry without any fear of recourse because they shared something. Because a lot of things happen that we don't necessarily know of. And although they may not be in full compliance, they may also not necessarily be a harm to the system if we can have an opportunity to change something. Now, there were some things that came up that we did flag and said, yeah, that's not really a compliant issue. And we'll just educate folks in the room that this is really not something you probably want to be doing right now because it was a clear delineation. But that's as far as that goes, so they can take that back with them and correct accordingly, if you will. So that was really good. We had only one retailer, but we did have one industry association that represents retailers, so that was good. But the retailer component of that for sampling was really interesting because when you're talking about vendor samples, and we were talking about vendor samples and education samples, so this wasn't for the negotiating sales and bud tender education. A lot of the retailers, and one of our concerns, I think, from the state side of things is not having an abundance or an overabundance of these samples floating around that are just, sitting in a box in a retail establishment, which we hear of. Well, and it sounds like, at least according to some limited, sources of information there, that's happening because some producers, processors are trying to, spread their wares around, trying to make sure that they can get these sales, but they're bringing them in without an order or an ask, if you will. And so it's kind of like, here's a bunch of stuff we'd like you to try, and then it doesn't get tried and it sits there. And so, I think in our deliberations around sampling, how can we cut out those unwanted samples, and how can we improve the sampling protocols that would benefit licensees? And one of the biggest concerns that licensees, I think, uniformly had was the education sample should represent the actual product. And so we have samples right now at a lower quantity level or volume level than you would actually buy in the store. And if you look at it from a beverage type of perspective, folks say that can change the flavor, that can change the, a number of things, and you're not actually getting whatever effect was the desired experience that folks would have for that. So I think we need to be revisiting what that looks like and how can we do that without compromising the public safety aspects. But I think there's opportunities to streamline some of those regulations. And so we're going to be looking at those issues. And then the last thing this week that we attended was a session out of University of Washington where they were talking about cannabis tolerance breaks. So from a public health standpoint on consumers of cannabis, when, if they've been utilizing a little heavy or whatever, having these, they call them tea breaks, but the tolerance breaks can help reset some of that. So the system that the person is using kind of gets reset. And I know I'm probably not doing it justice at all.
Does that just mean like a dry January? Is that what a tolerance?
Yeah. So they would do like a 30-day break, because if you have the ongoing consumption patterns, it may not be as effective for you. So when you're looking at it from a medical standpoint, those ongoing patterns and you continuously increase may not have the benefits that you're looking for. But by taking this break, it actually can help bring that back so it can offer the benefits that you're looking for. So I thought it was a really interesting conversation and presentation. And like I said, I'm sure I'm not doing it justice, but that was kind of the gist of some of that area, especially when you're looking at folks who really utilize this for medical benefits and have to use it often. So what does that mean and what does that look like for them? So upcoming that you'll see, the last thing I wanted to put on the radar is we're going to be talking about in some caucus conversations in the next few weeks to be determined to finalize on the dates. But we're going to be sharing with you concepts around a research program that we're developing that we would like to implement. I think that things like, quite frankly, the DDE conversation is something that you could task the group and say, we need to know enough about this scientifically on one side. That would be a good example of something that those resources would be there. They would know where to go. They would know what to look for and how to research those types of things. So that would be just one example, but we'll have a broader conversation around what that looks like in a few weeks. And then the other thing is we'd like to bring up the conversation around that capstone project for the medical cannabis program. They did some interesting surveys, put that out, talked with folks in retail shops, talked with consumers. And so I think we had some interesting information to share there. So we're going to bring that forward in caucus in a few weeks as well. So just something on the forefront. So that's what I have.
Yeah, great. We should do both those. I think we are getting them scheduled. And we had an internal meeting scheduled this week. Maybe it was last week on medical. We had took it off because of some of the DEs. But so we need to get back on that course too and look at what we really can do. And okay. Any other questions for Justin? No. Okay. Yeah, Rick.
I think what I'd share, because I think this is the second to the last meeting I'll have at EMT.
Who's counting?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just one more. CANRA, thank you, Justin. I guess I want the board to know that, and in discussions with other directors, that I've asked Justin and Kathy to stay involved with CANRA and even press Brian, as you learned today, to be more involved in that, because it is an incredible resource, including Mark. But on the interstate subcommittee that was created, back when the Schumer-Wyden-Booker proposal was being considered, and they introduced it for the first time in the Senate to legalize cannabis federally, part of CANRA's work, so I just share this, is is a belief that we need to create a commission of the states to help the federal government determine how to move forward. And it all has to do with uniform standards around everything that we do when we regulate the industry, whether it's a medical program or an adult use program. So I think, I mean, I'm glad to hear, Justin, that you're connected with that. And obviously the board members have an interest in that too. Next week, so that you're aware, I've been asked to join Jillian Schauer, the director of CANRA, Tyler Klimas, the president of CANRA, and then Will Tilbert from Maryland. We're going to be meeting with members of Congress, specifically Kathy McMorris Rogers, who chairs one of the important ag committees that's looking at the Farm Bill. And so we're looking at providing information about how we need to make that separation between hemp. Remember that hemp provision that started a lot of the problems that we have, that we need to make a clear distinction between hemp products and cannabis products that could be intoxicating. And frankly, you know, because of the work of all of you, we've got a THC bill that moved through the legislature to begin that process. And so I'll report back for you, but we're going to have some key meetings. We're also meeting with FDA and TTB, two agencies we've been spending time with the last 2 years, because they will have a key role today. Unfortunately, sometimes they don't exercise it, especially as it relates, especially at FDA, to the Delta 8 gummy phenomena that occurred outside our regulated marketplace. So just wanted to share with you. I'll come back and share the discussions there, but looking forward to that. Also, I just kind of wanted to recognize when this situation occurred with the contamination, pesticide contamination in Eastern Washington, I want to recognize the other 3 agencies that immediately came out when I called them. It was a prompt response from Derek Sanderson, the Director of Agriculture, and Kelly McLean, Laura Watson, the Director of the Department of Ecology, and then also, of course, Dr. Shaw, the Secretary of Health, working directly with Lacey Fehrenbach, who Chandra has been working with. And if you remember Lacey's one of the key people that got us through the pandemic at the Department of Health, along with Dr. Shaw and all his team. But I just want to say I had 2 instances in the last few days to reach out to them from a meeting that we had, David, that, you know, it's not just the staff. We need to reach out to the directors to make sure they're aware of what's going on here. And they've just been really prompt and responsive, all 3 of them. And I just want to recognize them. And in fact, will be helping us in the discussions. We'll have Friday, one with the growers that was set up this morning, and then one on Friday with the trade associations. And all those 3 directors have got the right people, I think, in that meeting with us on Friday. And I just want to recognize them and as part of the Inslee team of helping us try to figure out how to deal with this problem, because it's not going to be something we can solve on our own. As we know, we're going to need ecology, ag, and the Department of Health.
Yes. Okay, thank you. And Deputy Director Tony Hood for
Thank
general
you.
agency update.
Thank you, Chair Postman and Member Vollendroff and Garrett. I'll first address the SMP project. We're currently on schedule. We have Salesforce Release 1 scheduled for the end of June. That involves a portal where the outside will be able to get into the portal and do household move forms, banquet requests, and public records requests. We've had several demos after each sprint is done. The Accenture team does demos for us so that we can see a little bit what the system's going to look like, which has been great. We are having a all-staff town hall on April 27th, and we have 2 finance staff members and 1 from licensing that are going to come demo it themselves. These are new people who haven't demoed things before, so I'm excited about bringing in new staff so that they can touch and feel, so to speak, the system and show it to their colleagues at that town hall. I want to point out how great Becky's slide was about training and how well her staff did training. And then if you notice in one of the great things about the slide was it showed how the questions decreased so much. And that shows that the training, I think it shows that the training was working well. because the questions decreased in the manner that they did it. And so we have a meeting on Monday to talk about the training that will occur for the Salesforce Release 1 in June. And so I am sure that we'll ask them to do similar, if not exactly the same thing, for the next part. And that's being planned. We're also working on the training plan. I'm sorry, my dog barked. It made me jump. We're working on the training plan for Release 2, which is in March. That's the really big one. It's very complex, and that's why we're working on that training plan now. And then the technical side, which is the sprints and the requirements, and all of that is moving along well. We have very detailed staff making sure that the Accenture team is giving us what we ask for and what we need in the final system, and that we remain on schedule for that. But again, thank you to Becky's team for all of that training they did. We, on an operation level, we're moving forward on electric vehicle chargers. We're going to add more to headquarters, and then Will continues to work on them in the regional offices with his E&E partners. We have one wrinkle. If we do the faster EV chargers, we would actually have to lose electricity for a while in our building. So we need to decide as a group if that's something we want to do. Because of the way the system is working, they would actually have to shut us down for a little while. So we'll have to talk about whether we can do that and whether we really want the faster chargers at headquarters. As I believe you've seen, we have card readers now on the first floor. Several doors have card readers. And so there is one door to the outside that is currently open. You'll see it has a card reader, but the card reader is always green. That will change to red once we get the fire alarm or the fire alert system changed, because the idea is that it needs to go to green if there is a fire, so you don't have to fumble for your badge to get out. And so at some point, when we don't have a fire, which is, of course, the majority of the time, you will have to use
Almost always.
almost always, you will have to use your card to get out. So don't be surprised someday. And I have noticed for some reason after 5 o'clock, I have to use my card to swipe out. I asked Will, he said it's not supposed to do that, but we'll figure that out. So the idea is that if people wander in from the outside, we didn't want them wandering back into the enforcement area where they don't have business back there. So that's part of that reason. My next issue is to let you know I'm excited to work with Mark and Jessica on doing an agency-wide dashboard to show legislative implementation plans and how we're implementing them. We're also going to include any budget proviso requirements, any things that require action of us, we're going to include on that dashboard, and we can bring that to you when we get that going. I know Mark has a lot of great ideas from his other agency work. And I've, of course, have seen different dashboards at the other agencies I've worked at, so I'm excited for that. George, our CIO, recently met with the Office of Cannabis Policy from Maine. He met with them yesterday with 2 staff members from E&E, as well as some of his own staff members. They were interested in CCRS, and he explained to them what it does and what it doesn't do. Originally, I think they wanted to potentially get the code from us through some type of license. But I think after yesterday's conversation, it might not meet their needs, but we will continue to provide them information if they think it might be helpful. So that was a great meeting. Yesterday at management team, Chair Postman, you probably saw this. We all watched the documentary Who We Are Together as a management team. And we had planned to do that. And we had about 30 minutes to talk afterwards, which was great. And we're figuring out how we're going to roll that out throughout the agency. So that's what we were doing yesterday. Finally, my last announcement is that George has been nominated for an ORBIE award. It's ORBIE. It's an National Association of CIO Leaders. I don't know what ORBIE stands for, but he has been nominated for an award that based on the fact that he has demonstrated excellence in technology leadership. He was nominated by the CIO of the DVA. And so that's very exciting. There is a breakfast in June where they'll give out the awards, and they invited me to attend with him in Seattle. So I will go and I will hoot and holler from the back when he wins. And it's very exciting that he was nominated by his peer and that this national organization is recognizing him as a finalist and hopefully an award winner in June.
Yeah.
And that's all I have.
Cool. Yeah, thank you for that. And now we're to your official. Do you have anything more?
Yes, one more.
Okay.
Do we have time?
Yeah.
So Mark, thank you for a really successful session. The two bills that I wasn't sure. I mean, it was a lot of reasons why we were gonna have a lot of difficulty with both of them. Then you got our 3 board members confirmed. Maybe you got 11 days. Maybe you could confirm me, even though it isn't necessary. You probably could.
Yeah. That's
So
right.
just appreciate all the work that you've done. And Tony, thanks for sharing the information about George. I think I missed that before we did. So appreciate you recognize staff that's hopefully being recognized.
Yeah.
So
Cool.
Thanks.
The thing I'll add, I'll give everybody just a quick, brief update on the search for a new director. The board is hard at work on that, working with our recruiting firm, Karis Associates. Without going into detail, I'll tell you that the recruiters were really impressed by a couple of things: the number of applicants we got, the quality of the applicants, the diversity of where they come from and everything about it, very diverse pool. And then from the comments they got from LCB employees when we sent a survey out asking people for our employees for advice on what to be looking for. Not looking for applicants, but here are the things we're looking for. And I think the responses now is over 100 employees took the time to fill out that survey, and they said they've never seen anything like that. So it's great engagement. The 3 board members, we've just now started to split some things up and try to talk to people. And we'll be working towards trying to get some list of people to do more formal interviews with. I think we're on track to have somebody in the door before Rick goes out the door. I think, I would just say for my, I'm pretty pleased with what we see there in terms of applicants, and I'm kind of excited about it. So we'll continue to try to keep people updated, both internally and externally on that. That's the end of the agenda. Anything to add, Jim or Ollie?
No, just to reiterate, I think the pool of applicants is very impressive and diverse, and it's been interesting talking to people so far. Looking forward to continuing the process and feel like we have the potential for finding a great replacement, and hopefully before Rick leaves, so that there is, in fact, some of that overlap. So thank you.
Yeah. Anything, Ollie? No? Okay. Okay, well, with that, we'll adjourn. Thank all to the management team for filling us in today, and we will see everybody next week for a caucus at least, and we'll adjourn the executive management team for April 12th, 2023. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.